Welcome, baby. Before I begin, I want to thank you for sitting with me tonight. If you want to walk through the hidden rooms of a woman's life, I'd be grateful if you liked and subscribed. Now, let me pull back the curtain on a marriage the world believed was perfect. For 32 years, people said I had the kind of husband other women dreamed of. Gentle, hardworking, respectful, steady. Those were the words they used. And I wore them like church clothes. I never questioned them, never thought to examine the seams. I thought peace was something you protected by staying quiet. But peace can be a layer of dust over something rotten. And the truth is, the moment I found that old phone in the back of his nightstand drawer, a phone so forgotten the battery groaned awake, I felt a chill run through me. Something in that silence told me that once I opened it, I would never see my marriage or the man in my bed the same way again. It was a Sunday afternoon, the kind you barely remember later. Sun warm, birds lazy, nothing dramatic in sight. He was outside mending the back fence while I cleaned our room, humming like nothing in the world could go wrong. But when I opened that drawer and saw the silver phone lying face down like a buried secret, I stopped. I could almost hear something whisper, "Don't." But curiosity is a doorway, and I'd spent decades being the wife who never walked through it. I sat on the bed, knees shaking, and powered it on. The screen flickered and stalled as if it, too, wasn't sure whether it should tell on him. I stared at the man's side of the bed, suddenly realizing how much I had taken for granted: his loyalty, his faithfulness, his love. And somewhere deep inside, I already knew the truth. Nothing a person hides that carefully is innocent. When the phone came alive, I started scrolling, a small part of me hoping to see nothing. Maybe old photos, outdated contacts, dusty messages that meant nothing. Instead, one word stood out like a slap: recordings. A folder full of them. Dozens, dated all the way back. My heart thumped so hard I could feel it in my fingertips. I hesitated, because a good wife should never go digging. But who decides what good means? A man, a community, a church pew? I tapped the first recording anyway. His voice came through steady and cold, a tone I had never heard from the man who kissed my forehead every morning. He spoke about me, about our life, but not like a husband speaks of a woman he loves. No tenderness, no affection. He spoke like a strategist analyzing an investment. My breath caught. I had just unlocked a version of my husband that had lived parallel to me for years. Unseen, untouched, waiting to be discovered. In that first voice note, he said, "She won't leave. She needs this life too much." The words hit me like a slap I couldn't dodge. I froze, staring at the phone as if it might apologize. The man I was listening to was calculating, confident, almost smug. Not the smiling gentleman who asked me every morning if I slept well. This man spoke of me like a problem he had already solved. He talked about waiting, watching, planning, like he was preparing for a day when I would no longer be useful. Useful, not loved, not cherished. Useful. I felt the room tilt. I remembered every time people praised our marriage, how I smiled politely, telling them I was blessed, when really I was blind. I wasn't listening to a stranger on that phone. I was listening to the truth my heart had been too afraid to ask for. I should have stopped. Any other woman might have powered the phone off, thrown it in a drawer, and pretended she never heard a thing. But I sat there, shaking, and opened another recording. One dated the night of our anniversary dinner. The same night, he gifted me a necklace in a restaurant full of clapping strangers. The whole dining room cheered as if we were the couple everyone wanted to be. But listening now, he recorded himself afterward, saying he only did it to keep up appearances, because divorce rumors would start too early otherwise. My whole body went cold. I realized then that every tender gesture, every public compliment, every carefully curated moment might have been staged, not for me, but for an audience, for an image, for protection. And I sat on the edge of the bed, realizing there is no pain like discovering you were living in a love story where only one person believed in the script. I stared at that phone, barely able to breathe. My fingers trembled as I scrolled through recordings with dates that lined up perfectly with key moments in our life: anniversaries, arguments, promotions. Even the night I lost my mother and cried in his arms. I opened one labeled only with the date of her funeral. His voice came through, steady, detached, saying, "She's weak now." This is when dependency solidifies. I felt my stomach turn. While I was grieving, he was calculating. While I leaned on him, he was tracking how much heavier I'd become on his emotional scales. I remember thinking, this must be what betrayal feels like, not the sharp pain of a knife, but the slow realization that the blade had been inside you for years. I began to wonder, how long had he been recording his life like this? And why? What kind of man documents his wife's heartbreak like a business milestone? I clicked another recording, one from a night I almost forgot. It was the evening after my job was downsized. I'd come home quiet, embarrassed, worried about how we'd manage. He sat with me on the couch, rubbed my back, and said we'd get through it together. But the recording told another story entirely. He said, "She's becoming a liability. If she can't recover within a year, I'll start moving assets separately." Assets, as if I were a car losing value. I remembered how I clung to him that night, grateful to have a partner who stood by me. Now, I realized he wasn't standing beside me. He was weighing whether I was still worth the effort, and that was the moment something shifted in me. I didn't feel shock anymore. I felt clarity. The man I thought I married never existed. I'd been sharing a home, a bed, a life with someone who saw me not as a wife, but as a strategic investment. I kept listening, as painful as it was, because understanding the truth felt like the only power I had left. The next recording was from a year later, after I'd recovered financially and landed a better position. In public, he celebrated me, toasted me, bragged to friends. But on the phone, he said, "She's independent again. I have to reevaluate timing." Timing. He didn't sound relieved, proud, supportive. He sounded annoyed, as if my success disrupted his exit plan. I remembered how I'd hugged him that night, thanking him for never giving up on me. In reality, he was adjusting a schedule I never knew existed. I sat there, phone glowing in my hand, wondering how many anniversaries, birthdays, family gatherings, milestones were nothing but chess moves in his mind. I didn't know which was worse, the betrayal itself, or realizing I had been loving him alone for years. My heart pounded as I opened the next recording, terrified of what I'd hear. This one was from the night we bought our house, our dream home, the one we painted together, the one where I imagined growing old. I expected to hear something hopeful, maybe even proud. Instead, he said, "This property will maintain value even after separation." Good holding asset. I froze. The house where I planted flowers, where I cooked Sunday dinners, where I prayed, laughed, and built memories, wasn't a home in his mind. It was an exit cushion. I remembered how we sat on the floor that first night, eating Chinese takeout and dreaming about the future. He'd smiled at me then, kissed my hand, told me we were finally where we were meant to be. Now I knew that even in that moment, he'd been thinking not about building a life with me, but about how much he'd walk away with when he was done. I had to stand up. My body felt too small to hold the weight of everything I had learned. I walked to the window, trying to steady my breathing. Outside, he was still repairing the fence, calm, steady, focused, the picture of a reliable husband. It hit me then. Betrayal doesn't always look like lipstick on a collar or unfamiliar perfume. Sometimes it looks like a man tightening a bolt, humming to himself, while planning a future that doesn't include you. I looked at him with new eyes. The man who had spent years calculating when to discard me was right there in the sunlight, unaware that the hidden world he'd built was collapsing in my hands. Part of me wanted to scream, another part wanted to run, but I did neither. I walked back to the bed, picked up the phone, and forced myself to hear more. If he spent years documenting the truth, then tonight, I would finally learn it. I opened another file, my hands shaking so badly, I nearly dropped the phone. The date on this one was etched in my memory. The night I told him I was considering retiring early because the workload was wearing me down. I remembered his reaction clearly, his hand on mine, his soft voice telling me, "Baby, you've earned rest." It was one of the moments that made me think I had chosen the right man. But on the recording, he said, retirement would accelerate dependence. I may need to accelerate transition as well. Transition. I sat there thinking about all the nights I let myself feel safe in his arms, all the mornings I made coffee for us both, all the sacrifices I gave freely because I thought marriage was mutual. I realized he wasn't waiting for our future to settle. He was waiting for me to weaken enough to leave behind easily. My breath felt trapped in my chest, and a question rose in me like fire. How long had he been planning my replacement? The next recording answered that question in the most brutal way. It was labeled with a woman's name, Dana. My heart skipped. I opened it, bracing myself. His voice filled the room, lighter, happier than I'd heard in years. Dana is promising. Younger, driven, no emotional baggage. My vision blurred. I remembered that name from somewhere years ago, a coworker he mentioned once or twice as someone new in the department. I had no reason to think anything of it. I trusted him, maybe more than myself. He continued, "Once the house situation and finances are stable, I'll transition." That word again, transition, like my life, was a business restructuring. I sat on the edge of the bed, with bile rising in my throat. It wasn't just that he was thinking of leaving. It was that he had already picked her out, already evaluated her, already spoken about her with anticipation, and he had done it while sitting at family dinners, holding my hand, telling me not to worry about a thing. I gripped the phone harder and listened to the next recording, dated a few weeks later. He sounded irritated. "She's still doing well at work. Recovery complicates timing." I clenched my fists until my nails dug into my palms. I never thought my success would frustrate my own husband. I remembered that week clearly. I just earned praise from my manager, and he'd brought home flowers, saying he was proud of me. I thought I was growing, accomplishing, rising. In reality, I was ruining his schedule. I sat there realizing that I had lived my life measuring myself against expectations I didn't even know existed. I wasn't being loved. I was being monitored, evaluated, scored, and the most painful part was realizing how much faith I had placed in him. How many times I told friends I had a good man. How often I dismissed my own discomfort because no marriage is perfect. I never imagined I was married to someone who saw my emotional health and financial strength as obstacles. I couldn't stop now. Understanding was the only oxygen left in the room. I opened another file, one made during a night we spent sitting on the porch talking about the future. He had asked me then where I imagined we'd be in 10 years. I'd smiled, leaned on his shoulder, and said, "Together, gray and laughing." On the recording, he said, "10 years from now, I'll be 58, too old to restart if I wait longer." Restart. As if leaving me was a professional reset, not the dismantling of a life built across decades. I remembered how I'd looked up at the stars that night and thanked God for the life we'd made. He had looked up too, but now I knew he wasn't praying, he was calculating. I suddenly realized that every decision he'd made, every conversation we'd had, every kiss goodnight might have been filtered through this hidden agenda. The worst part wasn't that he wanted out. It was that he wanted out while keeping everything I had helped build. My chest tightened as I opened the next file. This one was shorter, but the most chilling of all. He said, "She'll never see it coming. She trusts too deeply." I sat there in silence, staring at the words on the screen, hearing them echo in my mind long after the recording stopped. I trusted too deeply. I loved too honestly. I stayed too faithful. And the very qualities I had been raised to believe made a woman a good wife were the same ones he was counting on to destroy me quietly. I looked over at the window where he was still outside, hands working, posture calm, a man who could betray while humming. I pressed my fingers to my lips, holding back a sob that threatened to break out. All I could think was, what kind of man documents the confidence that his wife will suffer silently. And what kind of woman would I become now that I finally knew the truth? I sat there staring at that phone, thinking of every time I had defended him. The women at work who warned me that no man is perfect. The cousin who once told me she felt something off about him. I had brushed them all aside, proud to believe in us. But belief is a dangerous thing when you give it to someone who only sees you as leverage. My hands finally stopped shaking, replaced by a numb calm I didn't recognize. I opened another file, half afraid it would finish breaking me. His voice was almost cheerful in this one. "I'll wait for the next moment of vulnerability," he said. "When she has a setback, I'll begin final steps." Vulnerability. He was waiting for life to hurt me so he could move on without guilt. I realized then that I had not just been living with a man, planning to leave me. I'd been living with someone counting on my pain to make his exit easier. I remembered a specific night, a year earlier, when I had come home overwhelmed and exhausted, convinced I was failing at everything. He held me, whispered that I wasn't alone, and told me we were in it together. I had cried into his chest with gratitude. Now, I opened the recording from that exact date. His tone shocked me. Emotional instability increasing. Could expedite timeline. My heart broke in a new way, not because he wanted to leave, but because he saw my lowest moments not as opportunities to love me, but as milestones in a secret countdown. I pressed pause, unable to listen further. I never imagined the person who wiped my tears was quietly celebrating them. I sat back against the headboard, staring at the phone like it was a stranger. I thought of all the nights I praised him to my friends, calling him my anchor. I didn't realize anchors can also weigh you down until you drown silently at the bottom. I needed air. I walked to the kitchen on unsteady feet, poured a glass of water, and stared at my reflection in the window. I looked the same eyes, same tired lines, but something fundamental inside me had cracked. The life I thought I was living had vanished in a single afternoon. When I returned to the bedroom, the phone's screen had gone dark, almost like it was waiting. I opened the next file, and this time there was someone else speaking, a woman's voice, Dana. She laughed softly, saying, "She has no idea." I froze, blood turning cold. Hearing her voice was worse than seeing her name on the folder. It made the betrayal real. My husband replied, "She won't, not until everything is signed." Signed. That meant paperwork. I felt my breath shorten. They weren't dreaming, they were planning, together. I realized then that my marriage was already over. I was just the last one to be informed. I should have stopped. Any sane person would have. But pain has a way of sharpening curiosity. I opened the next recording, one dated just 3 months earlier. Dana asked him how long he planned to keep pretending. He answered confidently, "Until the property refinance clears and investments are separated. After that, she'll have no grounds." Grounds. As if I were a tactical inconvenience. As if decades of loyalty could be wiped clean with legal precision. I sat there remembering the weekend we spent in the mountains 3 months ago. The one where he surprised me with a cozy cabin, wine, and long walks under the trees. I thought he did it because he loved spending time with me. Now, I realized it might have been him rehearsing normalcy, keeping up the illusion while legal processes quietly rolled forward. I pressed my palm against my chest, trying to tame the ache of realizing I had been a guest in my own marriage. I scrolled further and stumbled upon a recording that made me stop breathing. It was titled, "Final Plan." I tapped it with hands that felt too weak to hold the phone. He spoke with the cold precision of someone giving a business briefing. "Once accounts are separated and assets secured, I'll present terms. She'll be emotional but manageable. History shows she avoids confrontation." I closed my eyes. That sentence, "history shows," felt like a summary of my entire marriage. He had studied me the way someone studies a long-term stock, observing trends, predicting reactions, waiting for the perfect moment to cash out. The recording ended abruptly, but I wasn't ready to move. I sat there thinking about all the times I swallowed my hurt to keep the peace. All the moments I dismissed my own intuition to avoid conflict, my silence, my gentleness, my trust. He had counted on them. And now, armed with the truth, I suddenly wondered what he would do if I stopped being predictable. I sat there in a silence so heavy it felt like a third presence in the room. My entire body buzzed with one thought. He had studied me. My husband knew my fears, my habits, my quiet responses, and instead of guarding them, he weaponized them. I opened the next recording, needing answers. His tone was calm, confident. "Once separation starts, she'll retreat. She always withdraws when overwhelmed. Less resistance. Less resistance." He was counting on my emotional shutdown as a tool to make his betrayal smoother. I thought of the few arguments we'd ever had, how I always walked away first, thinking space would help. He had interpreted it not as maturity, but weakness. The realization burned. For decades, I had been protecting peace. He had been documenting strategy. And sitting there, I realized something else horrifying. I didn't know if divorce was his final goal, or merely the next step in a larger plan I hadn't uncovered yet. I opened the next file, bracing myself. This one began with him speaking to someone, another male voice, maybe a coworker. They were outside, the sound of birds in the background. My husband said, "Once everything is transferred, she won't have legal standing." Emotional, yes, but legally, nothing. The other man chuckled and replied, "Smart. Clean exits are rare." I gripped the phone tighter, shocked that he discussed my life with such casual coldness. My mind raced back to the financial documents he asked me to sign last year, the ones he framed as simplifying estate planning. I didn't even read them closely. Why would I? I trusted him. Now I wondered if those papers had quietly given him the advantage he was bragging about. My heart pounded in my ears as I realized I wasn't simply betrayed. I might have legally signed away my protection. And if that were true, he was far ahead in a game I didn't even know I was playing. My eyes stung with the realization that I had participated in my own undoing. I opened the next recording, hoping it would prove I was wrong. Instead, it confirmed everything. Dana's voice appeared again. "She's not suspicious," He laughed, saying, "No, she trusts completely. That's why this works." I closed my eyes, letting the words sink deep. Trust had been my foundation, my compass. I had believed that love meant giving without limit, without suspicion. Now, I saw how dangerous that belief could be in the wrong marriage. I thought back to every time someone asked why I didn't have joint meetings with our financial planner, or why he handled most legal decisions. I always said, "He understands that stuff better." I never imagined that while I was proud of the home we built, he was proud of the trap he fortified. It wasn't just manipulation, it was long-term architecture, and I had lived in it, unaware. I needed to see what else they had planned. I pressed the next recording, breath trembling. Dana asked, "What about her reaction? What if she fights?" His answer was immediate. "She won't. She's too afraid of losing dignity. Image is everything to her." I sat there stunned. Image. I cared about dignity, yes, but only because I believed marriage deserved respect. He mistook my loyalty for fear. I realized he never truly understood me. If he had, he would have known that a woman who has endured quietly for decades can also erupt with a strength that scares even her. I stared at the wall, thinking about all the years I bit my tongue rather than argue, believing that maturity meant choosing calm. He misread my calm as surrender. He misjudged the very woman he had been observing so closely. And in that realization, something powerful awakened in me, not anger, not sorrow, but strategy. I opened the next recording with new eyes, no longer just a wounded wife, but a woman gathering intelligence. This one was different. My husband sounded tense, almost anxious. "The window is tight. If she gets wind of anything early, she could freeze accounts. The timing has to be perfect." My breath hitched. So he was the one afraid, not me. For the first time all day, I felt the balance shift. He wasn't certain. He wasn't invincible. He was gambling that I would stay blind just a little longer. I looked out the window and saw him still mending the fence, completely unaware that his secret world was unraveling. I wondered how he would react if he knew I wasn't breaking. I was calculating. I sat there and felt a quiet fire burn through the numbness. If he had spent years preparing his exit, I would spend however long it took preparing my defense, because now the chessboard had changed, and I was finally making my first move. I sat there, staring at the phone, replaying his sentence. "If she gets wind of anything early." He really believed I was incapable of uncovering the truth until he decided to reveal it. For years, he had treated me like someone who needed guidance, protection, or direction, never as an equal. But now, I understood something he had not. I had the advantage of knowing him better than he knew himself. I knew his work habits, his routines, his blind spots, the places where he overestimated himself. He assumed that because I didn't react loudly, I wouldn't react intelligently. And while the pain in my chest still pulsed, something new was rising above it: clarity. I opened my laptop, thinking of bank accounts, joint documents, the financial planner's name, the lawyers we used during property acquisitions. Every trail had a starting point. And for the first time, I wasn't the observer in this marriage. I was the investigator. I opened the next recording, needing to understand the full scope. This one was shorter, but sharper. My husband's voice was low. Phase 1 is emotional distancing. Phase 2 is division of assets. Phase 3 is the clean break. Hearing my life broken down like a corporate separation plan made my stomach twist. This wasn't a falling out. This was a project. Timeline included. Dana responded, "She won't see it coming." He answered, "She never has." I paused the recording, letting his arrogance hit me with its full weight. He didn't just plan this separation, he enjoyed the anticipation of how blindsided I would feel. And that was the moment I realized he wasn't just leaving the marriage, he needed the satisfaction of winning it. That knowledge hardened something inside me. He wasn't destroying our life because he was unhappy. He was doing it because he wanted the sense of triumph that came with dismantling something I believed was permanent. That was his victory, but it wouldn't be. I clicked the next recording, bracing myself again. The setting sounded like a restaurant, glasses clinking in the background. My husband spoke confidently. "The key is to stay consistent. If I stay calm, she'll assume the marriage is stable. She never asks questions unless something feels drastically off." He was right, but he was right because I believed in quiet loyalty. Now, I wondered if he ever understood what loyalty cost a woman. Sitting there, listening to him talk like a strategist, I felt the weight of every moment I had chosen silence over confrontation. Silence, I now realized, could be misinterpreted not as peace, but permission. Dana laughed. "You're almost out." Out. That word echoed painfully. Out of what? Marriage, responsibility, commitment. He had already mentally exited while I was still living inside the vows. I pressed the screen with shaking fingers. He thought calmness meant defeat, but now it meant preparation. I took a deep breath before opening the next file. This one had a different tone, almost rehearsed. He was talking alone, maybe practicing what he would one day say to me. "I tried," he murmured, "but the marriage wasn't fulfilling anymore. I stayed for stability, for peace, but it killed parts of me." I froze. So that was the narrative he planned to deliver. The "I suffered silently" speech, designed to make him look noble instead of calculated. He was crafting a script that transformed him into the victim, and me into the oblivious partner who never saw him, never cared, never noticed. I stared at the wall, realizing just how deep he had gone to justify what he was doing. In his story, he wasn't betraying me, he was escaping a cage. The tragedy wasn't that he believed this, the tragedy was that he never gave me the chance to know he was unhappy before drawing up an exit strategy. He had already written the ending without letting me read the middle. My hands trembled as I opened the last recording in the folder. It was quiet, a long silence. Then, a voice I didn't recognize, older, calm. "Are you sure this is the path you want?" My husband exhaled. "It's necessary. It's the only way to get my life back without chaos." My heart tightened. Without chaos. So I was chaos, the woman who cooked, cleaned, supported, built a home, and stood by him for decades. The man replied, "Just remember, when you plan too perfectly, you forget life doesn't follow blueprints." My husband chuckled. "She won't deviate. She's predictable." Those words unlocked something powerful. Predictable. He believed he had mapped out my reactions, responses, even my emotional thresholds. And that was his greatest mistake. People break patterns when pushed to the edge. I closed the phone slowly, a cold calm settling in my bones. He thought he was winning. He thought he was ahead. He thought he understood me. But the game had just shifted, and I had finally entered the board. I sat at that kitchen table for a long time, the glow from the old phone screen fading, while another light flickered on inside me, something sharp, clean, and focused. For years, I had believed that protecting the peace meant protecting the marriage. But now, I saw how one-sided that belief really was. He had been preparing for a quiet exit, while I had been preparing dinner, anniversaries, and future plans. That was the imbalance. And suddenly, the shame I felt turned into something far more powerful. Strategy. If he was collecting evidence, I would collect proof. If he was organizing finances, I would learn every account, every signature, every asset we held together. I opened drawers, file boxes, and cabinets, looking not just as a wife, but as a woman suddenly handed the truth. And as I gathered documents, I realized something startling. I didn't know whether I was preparing to defend the marriage or dismantle it cleaner than he ever expected. I retrieved our home office lockbox, the one he assumed I never touched because he handled the complicated paperwork. My hands shook as I placed it on the table, remembering how many times he'd explained interest rates, insurance policies, and business earnings slowly, as if I needed translation to understand my own life. The truth was, I had trusted him completely. Now I inserted the key with a steady breath and opened the lid. Inside were folders, bank statements, real estate agreements, investment documents. I flipped through them one by one, realizing how much of our financial future he had arranged without my eyes. And then I found something that stopped me. His personal folder, labeled with a date just 3 months ago. Inside were new account forms, property evaluations, and financial separation estimates. My throat tightened. He had already planned not just a departure, but how I would stand financially when he was gone, and he expected I would never look until the damage was complete. I sat back, staring at the paperwork, trying to imagine the moment he had filled these out. Was I cooking dinner in the kitchen while he typed numbers into a spreadsheet? Was I folding clothes while he planned what percentage of the assets I would walk away with? Had I been sleeping in the same bed where he calculated the value of our life together? The realization hurt worse than betrayal. It was erasure. This wasn't about leaving. This was about controlling how I experienced being left. He wasn't preparing for freedom. He was preparing to shape my future without my participation. I flipped through the pages, seeing lawyer recommendations, timelines, even projected emotional responses he assumed he could manage. And in those tidy lines and organized printouts, I saw the greatest insult. He believed he had already won. He believed my reaction was predictable. He believed I would stay quiet. And in that moment, I understood fully The part of me that believed in us had just ended too. I placed the papers back into the box with slow, methodical movements. Reacting emotionally would only prove his assumptions right. Instead, I needed something he would never expect, a calm awakening. I brewed tea, sat at the table, and let myself think. In every marriage, there are moments when one person realizes they love more, or they see more, or they hurt more quietly. For the first time, I allowed myself to admit that I had noticed little changes over the years. The late nights, the sudden privacy with devices, the subtle withdrawal of affection masked as stress. I had seen these things and chosen to believe in our history rather than the present. And that was the real heartbreak. I wasn't blindsided. I had just been loyal. I looked at the lockbox, the phone, the recorded conversations, and I whispered aloud, not to him, but to myself, "You are not asleep anymore." And the silence that followed felt like the first step into the part of the story he didn't plan for. The next morning, I moved with quiet deliberation. I made breakfast, packed his lunch, and kissed his cheek just like every other day. But I watched him differently. I watched the way he avoided eye contact, how he rushed his responses, how he smiled with a tightness that looked rehearsed. He thought the performance was still working. He thought I was still in the role he assigned me. That was fine. I knew more now. When he left for work, I stood at the window, watching his car pull away, and I felt the shift inside me solidify. He wasn't the only one capable of planning. He wasn't the only strategist in this marriage. I opened my laptop and searched for lawyers, not because I was ready to file, but because knowledge was power. If he was making moves, I needed to understand the board. I spent hours reading, learning, documenting, and for the first time since listening to those recordings, I didn't feel weak. I felt awake. And awakening is a dangerous thing for the person who underestimates you. By late afternoon, my mind was a storm disguised in calm skies. I practiced speaking slowly, breathing evenly, because I knew he was gauging me every day, waiting to see if I sensed anything. He was studying my reactions the same way he studied financial charts, analyzing patterns, predicting outcomes. But he didn't know that the variables had changed. I had seen everything. I had heard everything. I wasn't reacting yet, because silence was the safest weapon a woman could hold when her world was shifting beneath her feet. I printed copies of the documents, stored them in a hidden folder, and began photographing every page with timestamps, not out of spite, but survival. You don't wake up married to a stranger without securing your footing. And as I prepared, a strange calm settled into me. I wasn't the woman he believed I was anymore. I was no longer a wife operating in routine. I was someone reclaiming her narrative. And reclaiming it quietly meant I had already gained the advantage. When he came home that evening, the house looked the same: dinner on the stove, soft jazz playing, kitchen lights warm and gentle. I sat at the table with a book open, just as I always did, while inside, entire strategies were forming like scaffolding around my heartbreak. He kissed the top of my head, and I felt the falseness in it, the disconnect between physical affection and emotional abandonment. That kiss wasn't love, it was habit. It was cover. He didn't realize I had stopped being the unaware wife and become the hidden witness. He didn't realize I was analyzing him now, watching the tightness in his shoulders, the rush in his breathing, the way he avoided asking how my day was. He didn't want answers because he didn't want conversations that required honesty. I smiled and played my part. Dinner was quiet, predictable, exactly what he expected. And I saw in his eyes a subtle relief. He thought the performance was still working. And that meant I had more time. Later that night, when he showered, I quietly retrieved his wallet from the dresser drawer. I wasn't looking for evidence, just understanding. I needed to know how deep his planning went. I found 2 business cards I had never seen before, one from a private real estate broker, another from a financial advisor in another city. Both dated just weeks apart. He was diversifying, preparing assets separate from our shared accounts. In marriages, secrets leave trails, and this one left breadcrumbs he assumed I'd never follow. I heard the water shut off and quickly placed everything back in position. I returned to bed and pretended to be asleep as he climbed in beside me. He lay there facing the ceiling, quiet, unaware that I could feel how distant he truly was. The bed felt like a tomb, 2 bodies, only one still mourning the marriage. I realized then that emotional death can arrive long before physical departure. And he had been gone for months. I was only just catching up. The next morning, I woke before him, a habit I rarely followed. I watched him sleep, and I felt grief not for the lies or the betrayal, but for the version of him I used to know, the man who laughed unguarded, who held me without distraction, who used to talk to me like I was the partner he wanted for life. When had that version disappeared? Quietly, slowly, like ice melting into a shape you can't recognize until it's gone. I wondered if there had been a moment when he tried to tell me, and I missed it. Regret is a heavy burden when you realize you might have listened too late. But then I remembered the recordings, the strategy meetings, the rehearsed speeches, the lack of transparency, and my sympathy evaporated. If he wanted to repair the marriage, he could have talked. Instead, he planned my role in his exit. That wasn't regret. That wasn't sadness. That was calculation. And it proved one painful truth: he hadn't drifted away. He had walked out emotionally long before I ever discovered the door. That afternoon, while reviewing the financial documents again, I noticed something unusual, a withdrawal request scheduled for the upcoming week, transferring funds into one of his new accounts. That meant the window was narrowing. I couldn't wait months or even weeks to prepare. Every day I stayed silent, he gained ground. Every day I acted unaware, he moved closer to stepping fully out of the marriage, with everything lined up in his favor. I leaned back in the chair and closed my eyes, feeling the weight of the realization press against my ribs. Women are taught to be patient, to wait, to softly approach change. But patience can be a trap when the other person is running ahead. I didn't cry. I didn't panic. I took a deep breath and murmured into the silence, "I'm not on your timeline anymore." He wasn't the only one preparing. Now, I would accelerate too. and whichever of us moved more wisely would define how the story ended. The next day, I did something I never imagined. I visited a lawyer. I didn't make an appointment under my real name. I walked in quietly, asking for a consultation with the calmness of a woman turning grief into precision. Sitting in that office, surrounded by framed certificates and the steady tick of a wall clock, I felt the last remnants of helplessness dissolve. The attorney listened carefully, eyes widening slightly as I described the recordings, the new accounts, the staged, emotional distancing. When I finished, she leaned forward and said softly, "He isn't planning a divorce. He's planning a financial ambush." Hearing those words from another mouth made my hands tremble, not with fear, but validation. I wasn't imagining the scope of this betrayal. It was real. The lawyer explained my options, my legal rights, the leverage I had now that I possessed proof. She looked at me with a mixture of sorrow and admiration. Most women come when everything has already crumbled. You came while the walls are still standing. I nodded. And for the first time, I didn't feel like the victim in my own story. The lawyer asked a question that pierced deeper than any betrayal. "What outcome do you want?" I opened my mouth, and nothing came out. I realized I had been reacting, planning, securing evidence, and understanding. But I had not yet considered the direction of my own soul. Did I want to fight for the marriage, or dismantle it cleaner, faster, and smarter than he ever planned? I closed my eyes, picturing the life we had built, the vacations, the dinners, the shared laughter, the whispered plans made in the dark. But then, just as vividly, I heard his voice from those recordings. "She won't see it coming. She never asks questions. She's predictable." Those weren't the words of a husband falling out of love. Those were the words of a man who had already stepped out and closed the emotional door behind him. Slowly, I exhaled and told the lawyer, "I'm not ready to decide today, but I need to be in control of my options when the decision comes." She nodded. Then we planned quietly. And quiet planning was something I had mastered. I walked out of the office with a folder in my purse and a new steadiness in my spine. The world outside looked the same: cars moving, birds flying, people laughing. But I felt changed, recalibrated. I wasn't the woman who discovered betrayal anymore. I was the woman preparing to respond to it. On the drive home, a heaviness settled in my chest, not from sadness, but from the weight of the secret I was now carrying. He wasn't the only one with hidden plans. I entered the house and paused at the doorway, realizing how strange it was to live in a home where both of us were strategizing in silence. Marriage should be a place of truth, but ours had become a battleground disguised as domestic peace. I sat on the couch, staring at the wedding portrait on the wall, two smiling people who had no idea what lay ahead. I whispered to that younger version of myself, "You are stronger than you think, and you're about to prove it." And in that quiet living room, a strange sense of empowerment began to rise. That night, he came home late, smelling faintly of cologne I didn't recognize. He walked in with the same practiced normalcy, keys on the counter, jacket over the chair, polite hello in my direction. But I noticed the details he assumed I'd never notice. The hurried removal of his second phone from his pocket, the subtle check of his watch, as if timing mattered, the way he avoided eye contact just a moment too long. I smiled calmly, serving dinner, asking light questions about his day. He answered in short, vague phrases, careful not to reveal more than necessary. If he believed I was still sleeping through the truth, his performance was perfect, but I was wide awake. After dinner, he disappeared into his office, door closed, typing something quickly. I stood at the kitchen sink, washing dishes with steady hands, listening to the faint clicks of his keyboard. 2 separate lives, under one roof, both preparing for a future the other didn't know. And the silence between us was now louder than any argument could have been. When he finally went to bed, I waited until his breathing settled into a deep, familiar rhythm. Then, quietly, I pulled open his office door and stepped inside. I wasn't looking to invade privacy. I was gathering truth he had already removed from our marriage. His desk was neat, organized, efficient, except for a yellow legal pad left partially open. On the page was a list titled Exit Objectives. I scanned it, heart tightening with each line. Minimize conflict, protect business assets, maintain emotional narrative advantage. But the last bullet point was the one that shattered something inside me. Make her believe it was mutual. My throat tightened. He wasn't just preparing to leave. He was preparing to rewrite the story, so I wouldn't even recognize my own heartbreak. I took a photo of the page, placed everything back untouched, and stood there in the dark office, illuminated only by the faint glow from the hallway. And I thought, with a clarity that surprised even me, if he wanted this to be a game of perception, he chose the wrong opponent. I stood in that dark office for a long time, breathing slowly, letting the weight of betrayal settle into clarity instead of chaos. The legal pad said everything he never had the courage to speak aloud. Not "I need change," not "we're struggling," not "can we try again." He had bypassed honesty for manipulation, conversation for conquest. I ran my fingers lightly across the polished wood of his desk, remembering the nights I used to bring him coffee while he worked late, thinking we were building a life together. But he hadn't been building with me. He had been building around me, constructing a life that would stand even if I was no longer part of it. And the irony was sharp. He believed he was moving undetected, but every step he took left a footprint because he assumed I would never look. In that moment, I made a promise, not spoken, not written, but pulsing through every vein in me. I would not confront him yet. I would not explode. I would not break the timeline. I would let him keep believing he was ahead until it was time to show him otherwise. I stood in that dark office for a long time, breathing slowly, letting the weight of betrayal settle into clarity instead of chaos. The legal pad said everything he never had the courage to speak aloud. Not "I need change," not "we're struggling," not "can we try again." He had bypassed honesty for manipulation, conversation for conquest. I ran my fingers lightly across the polished wood of his desk, remembering the nights I used to bring him coffee while he worked late, thinking we were building a life together. But he hadn't been building with me. He had been building around me, constructing a life that would stand even if I was no longer part of it. And the irony was sharp. He believed he was moving undetected, but every step he took left a footprint because he assumed I would never look. In that moment, I made a promise, not spoken, not written, but pulsing through every vein in me. I would not confront him yet. I would not explode. I would not break the timeline. I would let him keep believing he was ahead until it was time to show him otherwise. Driving home, I replayed every detail of our relationship in my mind, the good years, the light-hearted days, the shared dreams. It was painful to realize how much of it I still valued, while he had already repackaged it as a stepping stone to his next chapter. I walked through the front door and paused, taking in the familiar smell of the house we had painted together, the photos on the wall, the furniture we picked after long evenings debating textures and colors. This was the life he was leaving behind, but I wondered if he ever stopped to consider what he would lose. People think freedom is simply walking away, but what if the real cost is the stability you abandon? I stood in the center of the living room and realized something profound. I was grieving a man who no longer existed, and instead of crying, I felt strangely steady. The woman who had once been afraid of confrontation was gone. A new version of me was forming, quiet, strategic, and ready. Late that evening, he received a call he excused himself to take in the backyard. I watched from the kitchen window, my face expressionless, while his shoulders hunched forward as he spoke softly. I couldn't hear the words, but his tone was familiar, a tone of someone managing details, moving pieces, preparing next steps. He paced slowly, one hand in his pocket, nodding as if confirming arrangements already in motion. I realized how easily he had adjusted to two separate lives under one roof. When he came back inside, he smiled thinly and said he was tired. I nodded, pretending not to notice how quickly he showered and changed, how relieved he seemed when I didn't ask questions. And I thought to myself, this man had no idea that I had already seen the blueprint of his escape. He believed silence meant ignorance, but silence can also be a veil. And in that veil, a woman can gather truth, strength, and timing. I kissed him goodnight with the same calm he assumed was natural, not realizing it was now calculated. When he fell asleep, I sat at the edge of the bed, looking at the man I once trusted more than anyone. I studied the peaceful expression on his face, the relaxed jaw, the steady breathing. If someone walked in, they would see a devoted husband resting beside his wife after a long day. But I saw something different, the quiet of a man convinced he was in control. I thought of all the women before me who discovered betrayal too late, who reacted loudly and emotionally, while the world blamed them for the explosion instead of the spark that caused it. I refused to be one of them. I pulled out the folder the lawyer had given me, reviewing every page by the dim light of the small lamp. Options, pathways, protections. I wasn't choosing yet, but I was preparing to make a decision from knowledge, not panic. He had planned for a future without me. Now, I would prepare for a future not defined by him. As I closed the folder, I whispered in the darkness, "If the story is shifting, I will shift with it." and something inside me, quiet, strong, and new, finally woke up completely. The next morning, I woke before dawn, not with fear, but with a clarity that wrapped itself around me like armor. I looked at the man still sleeping, not with hate, but with an acceptance that sometimes the people we build our lives around are not meant to stay. I didn't slam doors. I didn't wake him. I didn't make a scene. I quietly dressed, placed the lawyer's folder in my bag, and stood in the doorway of the home we built together, finally understanding that the house was real. But the foundation had been cracking for years. While I kept painting over the walls, I walked out into the cool morning air, and for the first time in a long time, I felt my shoulders drop and my breath deepen. I wasn't free because he lost me. I was free because I finally chose myself, and as I closed the door behind me, I knew this chapter was over, but not my story. Thank you for walking every step with me. If you lived this journey in your heart alongside mine, subscribe so we can keep speaking truth together, softly, bravely, and without masks.